Before I tuck you into tonight's story, let me just say, if you enjoy these bedtime ramblings, don't forget to subscribe to Nap Giggles. And tell me in the comments, has your pet ever staged a midnight protest when you were desperate for sleep? I suspect I'm not alone in this. Now then, tonight's tale begins with good intentions. A rare evening when I decided to be sensible, to switch off early, climb into bed, and drift off like a responsible adult. But there was one small obstacle. A furry, four-legged roommate with very different ideas about how the night should go. What followed was less restful slumber and more negotiations with whiskers. This is the story of the night I tried to sleep early, and the cat disagreed. Every once in a while, I get this strange burst of responsibility. It sneaks up on me the way an old tune pops into your head out of nowhere. I'll be scrolling through an article or overhear a health tip on the radio and suddenly feel like I should improve my life immediately. That particular Tuesday evening, the inspiration struck in the form of an article titled, "Go to Bed Early and Reclaim Your Life." The author made it sound so easy. Just climb under the covers at a sensible hour, close your eyes, and wake up transformed into a better human. According to the piece, early sleepers lived longer, smiled more often, and possibly even had shinier hair. I didn't need any more convincing. I thought to myself, this is it. This is the night I finally act like an adult. No more midnight wanderings to the fridge. No more convincing myself that one more episode of some series is necessary for survival. Tonight, I would be disciplined. Tonight, I would go to bed early, and not just casually early either. I set a goal. 9:30. That was the time. It sounded noble. It sounded respectable. 9:30 was the bedtime of monks, philosophers, and people who drank green smoothies for breakfast. So I began preparing for this milestone as if I were hosting an important guest. I walked into the kitchen, rinsed out the teacup from earlier, and placed it neatly on the drying rack. The kettle, shining and loyal, sat in its corner like a soldier dismissed from duty. I clicked off the light with a sense of ceremony, as if darkness itself was applauding me. Next, I moved on to the thermostat. All the experts insist that the perfect sleep temperature is a little cooler than comfortable. So I dialed it down by exactly 1 degree. Just one. A signal to my body that I was taking science seriously, but not so much that I'd shiver myself awake at 3 a.m. The bathroom was next. I brushed my teeth for the full 2 minutes, humming a half-hearted tune as if my toothbrush were a baton conducting an orchestra of foamy bubbles. I flossed, which is a rare enough event that it probably deserves its own entry in a diary somewhere. By the time I spit and rinsed, I was convinced my dental hygienist would sense it telepathically and shed a proud tear. Finally, I entered the bedroom. The lights were dim, the sheets freshly laundered, and the pillows plump with possibility. I fluffed them carefully, one by one, until they resembled miniature clouds sculpted by an enthusiastic weatherman. The blanket lay smooth and inviting, like a perfectly iced cake. I slid into bed at precisely 9:29, with the smug satisfaction of a man who has beaten the system. I pulled the covers up to my chin, sighed deeply, and thought, yes, this is what peak maturity feels like. The room was silent, completely silent. No television humming, no phone buzzing, no traffic roaring outside. Just the gentle ticking of the clock on the wall, each second a soft reminder that I was already on my way to a better tomorrow. I closed my eyes and imagined the morning. I would rise refreshed, stretch like a champion, and glide into the kitchen for breakfast with a sparkle in my eye. People would look at me and think, there goes a man who knows how to manage his time. At 9:31, I was already congratulating myself for being halfway to dreamland. I even pictured myself boasting to friends. Oh, sleep? Yes, I get a solid 8 hours every night. It's really just discipline, you know? That was when I heard it. A faint sound at first, a soft scritch-scritch, like sandpaper brushing against wood. I opened one eye, certain I had imagined it. The door to the bedroom gave a slight rattle, just enough to suggest a polite tap from the other side. And then came the low, deliberate sound that broke my perfect silence. Murroo! My cat had entered the story. Now, I must pause here to explain something about her. She is a wonderful cat, soft, elegant, mysterious. Her whiskers twitch with a kind of wisdom I will never fully understand. But when the sun goes down, she becomes something else entirely. To her, nighttime is not for sleep. Nighttime is a stage. Nighttime is when she unveils her most dramatic performances, complete with leaps, acrobatics, and long operatic solos. So there I was, lying smugly under the blanket at 9:32, convinced I was well on my way to being a responsible human, when the cat decided to test my resolve. The scritch-scritch at the door grew louder. I tried to ignore it. I whispered toward the darkness, "Shh, I'm trying to be healthy." For a moment, it worked. Silence returned. I smiled in the dark, certain I had won this little negotiation. But 10 seconds later, there was a thump against the door. A solid thump, followed by a drawn-out meow so dramatic it could have been the opening note of an opera. I squeezed my eyes shut and muttered to myself, "Ignore it. She'll give up. She always gives up." The pawing stopped again. My breathing slowed. Sleep tiptoed toward me. I was just about to drift off when the silence shattered. From the hallway came the unmistakable crash of something fragile meeting the floor. I sat up in bed and sighed. I had forgotten the first law of living with a cat. There is no such thing as going to bed early unless she approves of the idea. The crash in the hallway echoed like a drum solo, and I lay frozen under the covers, staring at the ceiling. My first thought was, well, that's it. I'll never see that vase again. My second thought was, maybe it wasn't a vase. Maybe it was something unimportant, a sock, a coaster, something sacrificial to the gods of gravity. I held my breath, waiting for the follow-up noise, the sound of shards scattering, the clink of something rolling. But nothing came. Just silence. The silence of a cat sitting proudly beside her work, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I considered getting out of bed to assess the damage, but I stopped myself. If I got up, I would be rewarding her. She would learn that every crash summons her servant, and I was determined, truly determined, that tonight would be different. Tonight, I was the master of my own bedtime. So I rolled onto my side, tucked the blanket under my chin, and closed my eyes again. That's when it started. Tap. A single, soft tap against the door. Then silence. I told myself it was nothing, a coincidence. The house settling, maybe. Tap. Another one, just a little firmer. Tap. 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 The rhythm grew, the spaces shorter until it sounded less like coincidence and more like a Morse code message. If I had known Morse code, I'm fairly certain it would have translated to, "Let me in immediately, or the vase won't be the last casualty." I pulled the pillow over my head, determined to ignore it. The tapping paused. Then, Just as I began to relax, there came a low, questioning meow. The kind of meow that starts gently, almost reasonable, like, "Excuse me, I believe you forgot something." I stayed silent. The meow returned, louder. Not so much a question anymore as a statement. "You definitely forgot something." Then another, louder still. A full declaration. "You're forgetting me, and I'm deeply offended." I tried whispering toward the door, hoping reason might work. "Go to bed. Sleep. That's what we're doing. It's good for you. 8 hours. You'll love it." The scratching started. A soft, deliberate scritch at first, the way you might idly drag a fingernail down a piece of wood. Then another. Then faster, louder, until it sounded like she was filing her nails for a very aggressive job interview. I buried my head under the pillow again, but even through the pillow, the sound was unmistakable. Then came the thud, a solid bump against the door, and another, and another. I sat up, exasperated. "Are you headbutting the door?" Silence. Then, from beneath the door, a paw appeared. A small gray paw, claws slightly out, stretching into the room and swiping back and forth across the carpet like a fisherman testing the waters. I froze. It was a deeply unsettling sight, like something from a horror movie, except instead of a monster's hand, it was my cat politely fishing for attention. Swipe left, swipe right, retract, pause, repeat. It went on like that for a full minute, the paw testing the air as though she might accidentally stumble upon a hidden button that would magically open the door. "Stop it," I muttered. "There's nothing under there." But she didn't stop. If anything, she grew bolder. The paw flattened itself and stretched farther, claws scratching against the floorboards in a squeak that made my teeth ache. Then it disappeared, only to return moments later accompanied by a muffled meow, the sound of her face pressed against the gap under the door. I pulled the blanket over my head. "Ignore it. Just ignore it. She'll tire herself out." But the longer I waited, the more creative she became. She began alternating strategies: scratch, meow, thud, silence, scratch, scratch, meow, pause. Then the paw again. It was like she had organized her own military drill. At one point, she even tried rattling the door handle. I swear I heard the faint click of the metal as if she had briefly considered a career in locksmithing. I thought about getting up, just a quick peek to show her I was still alive. But I knew better. Opening that door would be surrender, and once she was inside, the real chaos would begin. So I stayed strong. I told myself I was a human. I had free will. I had evolved beyond this. Tap, scratch, meow, thud, silence. Then, just when I thought she had finally given up, she pulled out her most devious weapon, the guilt meow. It was softer now, almost a whimper, a delicate sound that suggested I was a cruel tyrant, heartlessly abandoning her in the cold hallway while I lay on a bed of luxury. I rolled onto my stomach and groaned into the pillow. "You're not cold. You're covered in fur," but she persisted. A soft meow, a pause, another longer meow. Then silence again, as though she were giving me time to reflect on my sins. I lay there, torn between irritation and guilt. I tried reminding myself that I was the adult in this relationship. I had a bedtime, a plan, a noble mission to improve my life. But somewhere deep down, I knew the truth. This was only round one. The night was young, and my cat was just getting started. The house was silent again, but I did not trust it. Silence, when it comes from a cat, is never a sign of peace. It is a tactical maneuver, a gathering of energy before the next assault. I lay perfectly still, hoping that if I pretended to be asleep, She would wander off and find some other midnight hobby, like reorganizing her toys or chasing imaginary moths. For a few minutes, the plan seemed to work. I could hear nothing but the faint ticking of the wall clock and my own breathing. And then, without warning, the concert began. It started with a single note, a long, rising meow that began soft, almost hesitant, and climbed until it was echoing through the hallway like the opening line of a tragic aria. I pulled the blanket over my ears, but she was only warming up. The second note was louder, longer, a drawn-out wail that seemed designed to express every injustice she had ever suffered in her life. The time I forgot to fill her bowl to the precise millimeter she preferred. The moment I dared to move her from the warm laundry pile. The tragedy of closed doors in general. By the third note, I realized I was no longer in a house. I was in an opera house. The cat had taken the stage. The spotlight was on her, and she was performing the Ballad of the Neglected Feline in front of an audience of one. She did not stick to one style. Oh no, this was not amateur work. She experimented. One moment a high-pitched screech, the next a low, throaty growl. Sometimes she sang staccato, little chirps and trills like she was auditioning for a bird choir. Other times, she held a single note for so long, I wondered if she had discovered the art of circular breathing. I lay there, wide-eyed, as the performance grew louder. "Stop," I muttered into the blanket. "It's bedtime. Nobody asked for this." She answered with a crescendo so dramatic it rattled the picture frames in the hallway. I considered earplugs. I considered noise-canceling headphones. But none of that mattered, because the sound wasn't just noise, it was drama. It was a narrative. It was impossible to ignore because every note carried meaning. I could almost translate the lyrics. Mew, you left me alone. Miro, the door is closed. Muru, you think you are in charge, but you are not. I sat up in bed, defeated, and whispered through the door. "You're not Pavarotti. Please, stop." She paused. For a moment I thought my plea had worked. Silence. Then she let out the loudest, most dramatic note yet, holding it for a full 10 seconds, before dropping into a low growl that sent shivers down my spine. I flopped back onto the pillow, staring at the ceiling. I live with a lunatic. The concert continued, verse after verse, aria after aria. At one point, she threw in a sudden crash from the hallway, knocking over some unidentifiable object to provide percussion, then back to the meows. She had become a one-cat orchestra. It went on for what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes. Long enough for me to question every decision that had led me here. Why did I think getting a cat was a good idea? Why did I believe I could enforce bedtime like some sort of monarch? Why did I buy a door that didn't come soundproofed? Eventually, the meows slowed, the volume dropped, the notes grew shorter. I thought at last the opera was over. The audience could go home. The curtains would close, but instead she shifted to a new act, the encore. The encore was quieter, yes, but far more pitiful. Little chirps and half meows, spaced out just far enough apart that I couldn't fall asleep between them. It was the equivalent of a performer stepping back on stage and whispering, "Just one more song." I buried my face in the pillow. "Please, I have work tomorrow. I need sleep." The response was immediate, a soft trill followed by silence, then another trill, higher pitched as if she were mocking me. I gave up. There was no point resisting anymore. My noble bedtime was in ruins. The cat had staged a full production, and I had been forced to attend. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but in resignation. The opera would end when she decided it was over. Not a minute sooner. When the opera finally quieted, I dared to hope the night was over. Perhaps she had grown tired of her own voice. Perhaps she had collapsed in a da-dee-dee heap of whiskers and fur, satisfied with her performance. Perhaps, though this seemed wildly optimistic, she had discovered inner peace. I lay back down. I closed my eyes. I inhaled, exhaled, and let my thoughts drift to nothing. That was when the sound of dragging began. A long, slow scrape across the hallway floor. Not a crash, not a thud. A deliberate, continuous scrape, as though she were dragging an object much too large for her. I cracked one eye open. "No," I whispered. "Absolutely not." The dragging continued. I tiptoed to the door, opened it an inch, and peered out. There she was, triumphantly sitting beside one of my shoes, which she had somehow transported from the front door all the way to the hallway. Her face said it all. "I have brought you a gift. A fine leather treasure. Now, open the door, peasant." I shut the door again. Clearly, resistance was no longer working. This called for strategy. A battle plan. A tactical retreat disguised as a victory. Plan A. The sock decoy. I rummaged in the nightstand and found an old sock. Perfect. I wiggled it under the door like a fisherman dangling bait. Instantly, a paw shot out from the other side, hooked it, and tried to pull it through. For 30 glorious seconds, she wrestled with it, growling like a wildcat. Then came the scratching. Loud, frantic scratching as she realized the sock was too big to fit under the door. The meows returned, short, furious ones. Then the unmistakable sound of her claws tearing at the fabric. I yanked the sock back. Plan A, shredded. Plan B, white noise. If I couldn't stop her directly, perhaps I could drown her out. I opened my phone, scrolled through soothing sound options, and selected gentle rainfall. The room filled with the calm patter of a storm. It lasted 30 seconds before she joined in. Meow, meow, meow. Each note precisely timed with the falling raindrops, like a duet I had never asked for. I switched to crackling fireplace. Mehro, raro. She adjusted her voice to sound like burning logs. I switched to waves on the beach. Me, woo, me, ro. She became the seagull. Plan B, mocked into oblivion. Plan C, the decoy, bed. I dragged out an old laundry basket, lined it with a blanket, and placed it outside the door. A humble offering. Close enough for her to feel included, far enough for me to claim victory. I opened the door a crack, slid it out, and slammed it shut before she could sprint inside. There was sniffing, a chirp, the sound of her climbing in. Success. Then came the purring. Not gentle, soothing purring. Number. This was industrial machinery purring. This was a lawnmower idling in the hallway purring. She purred so loudly the floor vibrated. Plan C, foiled by acoustics. Plan D, the feather on a string. Surely, I thought, if I dangled her favorite toy through the crack, she'd bat at it until she collapsed in exhaustion. I rummaged in a drawer, found the feather wand, and slipped it under the door. Whap, whap, whap. She went for it instantly. I smiled. Finally, she'll tire out. And then the feather disappeared. I pulled. Nothing. She had yanked the entire wand through the crack like a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Plan D, stolen. Plan E, the vacuum bluff. Desperation makes fools of us all. I remembered how much she hated the vacuum cleaner. I rolled it quietly to the door, turned it on for 3 seconds, and then shut it off. Silence. I smirked. Victory at last. Then, from the hallway, a single defiant meow, followed by another, louder, then scratching on the vacuum itself. She was taunting me. Plan E, backfired. Plan F, philosophical reasoning. By this point, I was delirious. I sat cross-legged on the bed and spoke through the door like a weary professor. Listen, I said, cats need rest. Humans need rest. We all benefit from circadian rhythms. What you're doing here is counterproductive silence, I continued, emboldened. In fact, by disrupting my sleep, you jeopardize your own well-being. If I oversleep tomorrow, who will feed you breakfast on time? Think about it. There was a pause, then a single elongated meow, so sarcastic it could have been subtitled, "Your logic amuses me, mortal." Plan F, ridiculed. Plan G, the double blanket defense, final idea. A desperate measure. If I could not stop her, if I could not bribe her, if I could not reason with her, then I would fortify myself. I layered 2 extra blankets over my head, wrapped them tight, and created a soundproof cocoon. For a few blissful minutes, I heard nothing. Then came the thud. She had thrown herself bodily against the door. Another thud, and another. I pulled the blankets tighter. She threw herself harder. Plan G, under siege. I flopped back onto the mattress, staring into the darkness. I had tried 7 different strategies, 7, each one dismantled with precision. The truth was undeniable. This wasn't strategy anymore. This was survival. When the dragging of shoes, the purring, the theft of socks, and the taunting meows had all failed to break me, I sat on the edge of the bed in silence. The clock ticked. My eyelids twitched. My brain attempted sleep, but my soul was stuck in negotiations with a furry dictator. I told myself, you are a human being. You are taller, smarter, and allegedly more evolved. Surely you can outwit one 10-pound cat. And thus, I sketched more strategies. Plan H, the pillow wall. If soundproof blankets weren't enough, then perhaps I could build a wall. I stacked pillows, one after another, in a barricade around my bed. 4 on the left, 3 at the foot, 5 against the headboard, a fortress of cotton. This, I whispered, is impenetrable. I crawled into my fortress, closed my eyes, and almost relaxed. Then came the noise. Not a crash, not a meow, not scratching. It was the ER, sound of her claws carefully testing the wall. A deliberate scrape, then a pause. Another scrape, then another pause. She was inspecting my defenses. And then, slowly, she began climbing the outside of the fortress, claw by claw, pillow by pillow. By the time she reached the top, the entire barricade collapsed on me like an avalanche. Plan H, buried alive. Plan I, the radio trick. If my voice had no effect, perhaps a stranger's would. I dug out a small radio, tuned it to a late-night talk show, and let a calm announcer drone on about global finance. I thought, yes, she'll hear another human voice. She'll assume I'm awake, busy, not to be disturbed. For 2 minutes, it worked. Then she began answering. Meow. Pause. Meow. Each perfectly timed, as though she was a guest caller on the program. The announcer would mention the stock market, and she would reply with a solemn Mehiro. Plan Y, co-hosted. Plan J, the snack diversion. It was dangerous, yes, but I was tired. I decided to risk bribery. I cracked the door just enough to slide a single treat into the hallway. The sound of crunching followed. Success, I slid another. Crunch, a third, crunch. By the 5th, she had realized the pattern. She stopped eating and sat silently by the door, waiting for more. I did not oblige. The silence stretched for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. And then, with the speed of a professional athlete, she shoved her paw under the door and began fishing around the floor of my room like a burglar reaching for valuables. Plan J, extortion. Plan K, the ceiling gambit. At this point, I was hallucinating solutions. I thought, if soundproofing doesn't work from the floor, maybe it'll work from above. So I dragged the mattress halfway across the room and positioned it under the ceiling fan. My idea was that the gentle hum from above would drown her out. It didn't. Instead, she interpreted the moving shadows of the fan as a new enemy. The meows grew shrill. The thuds against the door became frantic. I had accidentally radicalized her. Plan K, airborne chaos. Plan L, the chair trick. If she wanted me in the hallway, maybe I could fake it. I carried a chair to the other side of the door, set it down quietly, and draped a shirt over the backrest. From her side, it might look like I was sitting calmly, keeping her company. I sat in bed, smug. She'll see the shadow, I thought. She'll be satisfied. For 10 seconds, silence. Then she tried to climb the chair. I'd forgotten the one universal cat law. Anything vertical must be conquered. I heard the wobble, the scrape, the crash. The chair tipped over, the shirt fell, and now she was even louder, indignant that her new climbing gym had been taken away. Plan L, toppled. Plan M, the treaty attempt. Desperation breeds diplomacy. I opened the door a crack, crouched down, and looked her in the eye. Listen, I said softly. We can coexist. I'll give you one pat, just one. Then I go to bed. Deal? She blinked slowly, the universal cat signal of affection. My heart swelled. Perhaps finally we had reached an understanding. I reached out my hand. She sniffed it. She nuzzled it. Then she bit me. Plan M, betrayed. Plan N, the cold floor bluff. I read once that cats dislike lying on cold surfaces, so I took a baking tray from the kitchen, chilled it in the freezer, and slid it outside the door as her only available resting spot. She ignored it completely. Instead, she dragged my other shoe onto it. Plan N, accessorized. Plan O, the alarm counterattack. If she insisted on waking me, perhaps I could return the favor. I set my phone alarm to blast music for 1 minute every 5 minutes. She would find the noise intolerable, retreat to another room, and I would turn it off once peace was restored. The first alarm went off. She yowled, progress. The second alarm went off. She yowled louder. The third alarm went off. She began singing with it. Plan O, duet. Plan P, the final gambit. In utter exhaustion, I dragged every spare blanket, pillow, and towel into the closet. I sat on the floor, wedged between winter coats and boxes of old holiday decorations, and declared the closet my new bedroom. At last, silence. I relaxed. I breathed. I was safe. And then, faintly from outside the closet door, came the sound of scratching. She had found me. Plan P, discovered. I slumped against the coats and whispered to myself, there is no escape. There is no plan. There is only her. The cat purred outside, victorious. And so ended my final attempt at strategy. The war was not won. It had only begun. There comes a moment in every night when a cat decides to abandon diplomacy and proceed directly to performance art. For my cat, that moment arrived just after 3 a.m. It began with a single sprint, not a gentle trot, not a casual stroll, as he full-speed dashed from one end of the hallway to the other, claws clicking against the hardwood like a tiny furry tap dancer late for rehearsal. Then silence. Then another sprint, and another. It quickly became clear that she was not simply running. She was competing. The hallway had become a stadium, the living room a track, and she was the sole contender in the 3 a.m. Olympics. Event 1, the hallway sprint. She crouched at one end, tail twitching like the starter pistol was about to fire. Then, go. She shot down the hall with the velocity of a caffeinated rocket, skidding around corners, leaving invisible skid marks in her wake. I listened from bed as her claws made a pattern, rapid taps, then silence, then a thud as she launched off the baseboard to gain extra momentum. The pattern repeated. Run, skid, thud. Run, skid, thud. Over and over, like the world's least relaxing metronome. Event 2, the curtain climb. A true Olympian never sticks to one event. Number. She must cross-train. Without warning, the sound changed. The rapid tapping gave way to a frantic rustle. I opened one eye. The curtain swayed violently, as though possessed by restless spirits. There she was, halfway up the fabric, climbing like an ambitious mountaineer attempting Everest. Claw by claw, inch by inch, she scaled the curtain rod. At the top, she paused, surveying her kingdom like a victorious champion. Then, in an act of what I can only describe as deliberate sabotage, she leapt off, landing with a crash that rattled the lamp. I buried my head in the pillow. She prepared for her next event. Event 3, the kitchen counter vault. Every Olympics needs a gymnastics event. Hers was the vault. The kitchen counter became her springboard. I heard her leap onto a chair, pause for dramatic effect, then launch onto the counter with the grace of a gymnast sticking the landing. Unfortunately, she landed on a spoon. The spoon clattered to the floor, followed by a fork, followed by a glass. The judges would not have been impressed, neither was I. Event 4, the invisible chase. Then came the strangest event of all, the chase of an invisible opponent. She tore through the living room, tail puffed, back arched, darting left and right in pursuit of something only she could see. Perhaps it was a ghost, perhaps a shadow, perhaps the manifestation of my lost sleep schedule. Whatever it was, she chased it with ferocity. She cornered it behind the couch, pounced, then sprinted away as though the invisible beast had fought back. From bed, all I heard was the chaotic thudding of furniture being treated as an obstacle course. Event 5, the bedroom attempt. At last, she returned to my door. Scratch, scratch, scratch. This was no ordinary scratching. This was Olympic scratching. A steady, rhythmic scraping designed to test the endurance of both claw and human patience. Then, silence. Then, the unmistakable sound of her throwing her entire body against the door like a battering ram. Thud. Pause. Thud. Pause. It was less the 3 a.m. Olympics and more the 3 a.m. siege. Event 6, the surprise high jump. Just when I thought the chaos had subsided, the silence ended with a new sound directly above me. The ceiling creaked. I froze. There was a thump. Somehow, impossibly, she had scaled the bookshelf, leapt onto the top of the wardrobe, and was now perched above my bed like a gargoyle. For a brief moment, there was only silence. Then she jumped, right onto my stomach. The air left my lungs in a wheeze. She purred, pleased with her landing, and then before I could recover, she sprinted off again to restart the games. This continued for what felt like an eternity. Sprints, vaults, climbs, crashes, a one-cat Olympics performed at maximum volume for an audience of one unwilling insomniac. Eventually, the chaos slowed. Her paws grew quieter, her landings softer, the curtains swayed less, the hallway fell silent. At last, she returned to the door and let out a single, satisfied meow. The games were complete. The medals had been awarded. She had, without question, taken gold. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if sleep was even a concept anymore. The clock read 3:59, and then came the sound of a litter box being enthusiastically excavated. The Olympics, it seemed, had added a final event. It was nearly 4 in the morning when I accepted defeat. Not total defeat. I was not waving a white flag, but I was willing to make a small concession, a tactical retreat in the war of bedtime. I decided I would bribe her with a midnight snack. Perhaps, I thought, if she ate something, she would be satisfied. She would curl up, purr herself into a carb-induced coma, and finally, I could sleep. A foolish thought, but fatigue makes fools of us all. The stealth mission. I crept into the kitchen in silence, every floorboard a potential betrayer. The refrigerator hummed loudly, as though announcing my location to the enemy. I opened the cupboard slowly, wincing as the hinges squeaked. There, on the middle shelf, was the packet of treats. The Holy Grail. I shook it once, very lightly. Instantly she materialized at my feet, eyes glowing in the dim light, tail twitching like a whip. The packet had betrayed me. The dispensing ceremony. I placed a single treat on the floor. She devoured it instantly, then looked up with the expression of a seasoned gambler demanding the next round of cards. I placed another. Gone in seconds. Another. Gone. I tried to ration them, spacing them out with long pauses. She filled those pauses with increasingly impatient meows, each one louder than the last. After the 6th treat, I stopped. "That's it," I said. "All done. No more." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she licked her paw, turned her back, and sauntered away. I exhaled in relief. Perhaps this had worked. The reconnaissance phase. I returned to bed. 10 minutes passed in silence. Then I heard it. A faint rustling. At first I thought it was the wind. Then I realized the wind did not normally open cupboards. I crept back to the kitchen. There she was, standing on the counter, paw deep in the cupboard, dragging the treat packet onto the floor with the persistence of a safecracker. She looked at me without shame, without hesitation. She had become the burglar, and I the night watchman who was always 2 steps behind. The bag rattle. Symphony, I retrieved the packet and put it on the highest shelf, far out of her reach, or so I thought. Minutes later, I heard the unmistakable sound of plastic being assaulted. I returned to find her standing proudly on top of the microwave, stretching one paw upward to bat the packet off the shelf. When it fell, she pounced. Not to eat, but to rattle. She batted it across the floor like a hockey puck, the plastic crinkling with every strike. Rustle, rustle, rustle. She had turned the treat bag into an instrument, and she was composing a concerto. The empty bowl deception. In desperation, I filled her food bowl, a generous portion of her regular kibble. She approached, sniffed it, and sat down. She did not eat. Instead, she stared at the bowl, then stared at me, then back at the bowl, as if to say, "This is not what I ordered." She meowed, once, twice. Then she placed one paw in the bowl and slowly, deliberately pushed it. Kibble spilled across the floor like marbles. She batted one piece under the fridge, another into the hallway, a third into the shoe I had so carefully hidden earlier. It was not food. It was ammunition. The final move. I cleaned the floor, put the food back, and stumbled toward bed. Surely she would grow tired. Surely this could not continue. But just as I settled under the blanket, I heard the faint sound of chewing. I opened one eye. There she was, sitting triumphantly on my nightstand. Not with kibble, not with treats, but with the corner of the empty treat packet itself, which she had stolen, shredded, and was now gnawing like the world's noisiest trophy. The rustling echoed through the room. It was not hunger, it was not need. It was sabotage. Thus ended the saga of the midnight snack. I had fed her, bribed her, and cleaned up after her, yet she had achieved her true objective, keeping me awake long enough to hear the crinkle of victory. The clock read 4:30. Sleep apparently was not on the menu. By 4:30 in the morning, I had accepted my role as a spectator. The cat, however, had accepted her role as an athlete, and not just an ordinary athlete. She was the sole competitor in the Great Zoomie Marathon. The event began with little warning. The opening ceremony. There was silence for exactly 3 minutes. Then a low growl echoed from the shadows of the hallway. The growl was followed by the unmistakable sound of paws gathering traction. Without fanfare, without torch, without anthem, the marathon commenced. She launched forward with maximum thrust, claws clattering against the hardwood like tiny drumsticks. 1 lap, 2 laps, 3 laps. Her route stretched from the front door to the far bedroom and back again. Each time she reached a wall, she ricocheted off it like a billiard ball, adding a sharp thud to the rhythm of her run. The sofa sprint. The hallway was not sufficient. She swerved into the living room, vaulted onto the sofa, over the armrest, and onto the coffee table. The coasters rattled in protest. One toppled, another slid to the floor. She ignored the casualties, leaping back over the sofa as though it were a hurdle placed there for her benefit. She repeated this lap several times, establishing the sofa sprint as the second official event, the staircase gauntlet. Next came the stairs. She launched herself upward, scaling all 10 steps in 2 seconds flat. At the landing, she skidded, rotated, and bolted back down at equal speed. She repeated this maneuver again and again, the sound echoing like a miniature stampede. The banister shook. The frames on the wall listed to one side. The staircase became less an architectural feature and more a racetrack. At one point, she took the stairs 2 at a time. At another, she abandoned the stairs entirely and jumped halfway down in one reckless bound. Landing complete, she carried on without pause. The bathroom relay. Halfway through the marathon, she altered course into the bathroom. There was silence for 2 seconds, then chaos. The shower curtain rustled, the rod groaned. She scaled it like a vertical sprint. From the top, she launched herself into the bathtub, producing a metallic clang that echoed down the hall. Then, as if satisfied with her detour, she leapt back out and darted past me before I had even reached the doorway. The curtain swayed behind her like the aftermath of a storm. The kitchen counter hurdles. The next leg was the kitchen. She used a chair as a springboard, vaulted onto the counter, and skidded across it like a bobsled out of control. A spoon fell. A fork followed. The cutting board tipped, landed, and rattled in protest. She leapt down, circled once, then repeated the entire maneuver as though practicing for style points. Each lap dislodged another item. By the 3rd pass, the counter was bare, its contents scattered across the floor in an improvised obstacle course. The bedroom circuit. The course now included me. She burst through the bedroom door, dashed across the bed, and used my stomach as a springboard. From there, she leapt onto the dresser, then the wardrobe, then back down to the floor, completing a circuit of chaos before darting into the hall again. She repeated this with such precision that I began to feel less like a person and more like an inconvenient speed bump placed in her track. The windowsill relay. The living room windows became her next training ground. She leapt onto the sill, sprinted its length, leapt down, circled once, then leapt back up again. Each lap included a dramatic pause where she peered through the glass as if racing an invisible opponent outside. Once, she mistimed her leap and nearly toppled the curtain rod. She recovered instantly, resumed her sprint, and pretended nothing had happened. The sideways dash. In the hallway, she paused, puffed her tail to maximum capacity, arched her back, and began a sideways dash. There was nothing to chase, nothing to fight, but sideways she went, scuttling down the hall like a crab possessed by rocket fuel. At the end of the hall, she rotated 90 degrees and bolted forward again, as if the sideways portion were simply a warm-up exercise. The double loop. The final act was the most chaotic. She created a loop. From hallway to living room, over the sofa, into the kitchen, onto the counter, down to the floor, back into the hallway, up the stairs, down the stairs, through the bedroom, across the bed, onto the dresser, off the wardrobe, out the door, back into the hallway. Repeat. She ran this circuit continuously for nearly 20 minutes. Each lap grew faster, each lap louder, each lap more destructive. By the time she slowed, the house bore the marks of her victory, the finish line. At last, she collapsed in the hallway, stretched out like a ballet runner who had completed a grueling course. She licked one paw. She yawned. Then, without ceremony, she fell asleep. The great zoomie marathon had ended. The aftermath. The house was in ruins. The coasters lay scattered across the living room. The shower curtain clung to the rod by one last ring. The counter was stripped of utensils. The pictures on the stairwell leaned precariously. And the champion of the race, the sole competitor, slept in the middle of the hallway with the peace of the victorious. The time, 5 o'clock in the morning. The audience, exhausted. The athlete, unconscious. The marathon, complete. The clock edged toward 5:30 in the morning. The house was silent at last. The marathon was over. The racers slept in the hallway. I lay in bed, too tired to move, too stubborn to admit defeat. For 12 minutes, peace remained. Then the music began. Movement 1. The solo. It started with a single note. Meow. The sound echoed through the hallway. Not loud, not demanding, simply declarative. A statement of presence. 30 seconds later came another. Meow! The gap shortened. Soon the notes arrived in pairs. Meow, meow, then in trios. Meow, meow, meow. This was no longer casual. This was rehearsal. She paced as she sang, from hallway to kitchen, from kitchen to stairs, from stairs to doorway. Each location added its own acoustics. The kitchen produced a hollow echo. The stairs provided a soft reverb. The doorway gave a sharp, direct tone. She was testing the room. Movement 2. The bedroom aria. Satisfied with her warm-up, she leapt onto the bed. Her paws landed squarely on my ribs. She positioned herself on my chest, face close to mine, and resumed. Meow. Mew. Meow. She shifted tone with each delivery. One note nasal, one note throaty, one note stretched into a warbling trill. I was the audience. She was the diva. The bed became her stage, the ceiling her canopy. My unwilling ears her amphitheater. The aria continued for 15 minutes, uninterrupted. Movement. 3. Percussion section. A chorus requires instruments. She recruited the furniture. The dresser was her drum, tapped repeatedly with soft thuds. The closet door, her cymbal, rattled with loud bangs. The nightstand, her xylophone, each item pushed carefully to the floor, one by one. A pen fell first. Clink. Then a book. Thud. Then the alarm clock. Crash. Each sound folded into the performance. It was deliberate, methodical, musical. The percussion echoed down the hall, merging with her vocals into a chaotic duet. Movement 4. The bird duet. At 6 o'clock, the first birds awoke outside. They chirped, they trilled, they whistled. The cat froze on the windowsill. Her ears twitched, her tail flicked. Then she responded, "Meow." The birds chirped back. She meowed louder. The birds intensified. It became a duet of competing choirs. The morning sky carried the bird songs. The bedroom walls carried the meows. Neither side surrendered. Movement. 5. The improvisation. Having established dominance, the cat expanded her repertoire. She rolled onto her back and meowed upside down. She leapt onto the dresser and meowed downward. She pressed her nose into the curtains and meowed through fabric, producing a muffled, haunting tone. Each method offered a new texture, each sound layered into the performance. The result was not beautiful, but it was relentless. Movement 6. The March of the Bowl. At 6:30, she moved to her finale. She walked to her food bowl in the kitchen. She tapped it with her paw. Clink. Then she meowed. She tapped again. Clink. Another meow. The rhythm repeated. Tap, clink, meow, tap, clink, meow. It was the march of the bowl, the final movement of her dawn symphony, the encore. I thought it had ended, but no symphony concludes without encore. She returned to the bedroom, climbed onto the bed, and placed her paw on my face. She looked me in the eye. She opened her mouth. Meow. One last note, held longer than the rest, sung with finality. Then she curled beside me and fell asleep instantly, leaving the silence of aftermath. The audience reaction. The house was a mess. The furniture leaned. The alarm clock lay sideways on the carpet. The curtains swung gently from her earlier improvisations. And I, the sole audience, lay awake, the only human to have endured a full performance of the dawn chorus. The time, 6:45 in the morning. The cat asleep. The birds still singing. The audience defeated. The concert was over. The clock read 7 o'clock. The night was over. The dawn was complete. The cat had collapsed. The statue in the hallway. Her body was stretched like a statue across the hallway. Paws extended, tail curved, whiskers spread evenly in perfect symmetry. She was immovable. The hallway belonged to her now, a barrier between bedroom and bathroom, a living obstacle in the architecture of the house. The archaeological survey. The remains of the night were visible everywhere. It resembled the aftermath of an excavation. Each room displayed evidence of activity. Each object told its own story. The bedroom. The dresser had lost 3 items: a pen, a small notebook, a pair of socks, though only one had made it to the floor. The second was missing, perhaps carried away, perhaps hidden for later amusement. The nightstand was stripped bare. The lamp leaned slightly to the left. The alarm clock blinked on the carpet. Its red numbers tilted sideways, counting time with reduced dignity. A book lay open on the floor, its pages crumpled from impact. The bookmark had disappeared. The story it contained would never resume from the correct place. The bathroom. The shower curtain hung loosely, detached from several hooks. The rug was folded in half, as though dragged and abandoned. Mid-performance. The toilet paper roll was thinner than it had been yesterday. The paw prints explained why. The kitchen. The counters were stripped of all small items. A spoon rested on the floor. 2 coasters had migrated beneath the table. A fork leaned precariously against the refrigerator, as if waiting for rescue. The food bowl stood at the center of the kitchen tile. Its position was deliberate. Its rim bore the faint mark of repeated paw strikes from the march of the bowl. The living room. The couch pillows were not in their original positions. One leaned forward, another backward, a third upside down. The remote control had vanished. The television power button bore the faint smudge of paws. The rug displayed claw marks in 2 straight lines, as though a miniature race had been recorded in fabric. The coffee table coasters were scattered like leaves. 2 had made it to the far corner of the room. 1 rested under the couch. The 4th was missing entirely. The staircase. The banister rattled when touched. A faint dusting of cat hair suggested high-speed collisions during the marathon. 1 slipper lay on the 3rd step. Its partner had not been located. The human state. I surveyed these details while moving slowly through the house. My body resisted each step. My thoughts lagged behind, repeating the same message: sleep. But there was no time. The morning routine proceeded. Coffee brewed, shower ran, clothes were chosen with minimal logic. The house continued in silence, except for the birds outside. The cat's state. The cat remained motionless in the hallway. Her breathing was slow. Her paws twitched once, perhaps in dream, perhaps in memory of the night's performance. Her tail flicked briefly, then stopped. Her ears shifted once, then settled. Otherwise, she was stone. The hallway remained blocked. I stepped carefully over her to continue the day. She did not move. The collapse was complete. The cycle recorded. The pattern was now undeniable. At night, chaos. At dawn, performance. At morning, collapse. The human followed the inverse cycle. At night, endurance. At dawn, survival. At morning, exhaustion. Both cycles aligned perfectly, like gears turning in opposite directions. The machine of the household was balanced. The balance was unfair. The ruins. By 8 o'clock, the house resembled an archaeological site. Objects displaced, furniture adjusted, curtains leaning, rugs folded. Each room displayed evidence of the event. Each surface carried the mark of participation. The only resident unmarked by fatigue was the cat. Her ruin was temporary. Her recovery was immediate. Her collapse was restful. The house slept with her. Only I remained awake. The night had been long. The morning had been difficult. The house bore scars of both. And yet, by mid-morning, a transformation occurred. The awakening. The cat stirred. She stretched with mathematical precision. Each limb extended one at a time. She yawned for 6 seconds. She blinked slowly, once, then twice. Her fur, though ruffled from the hallway collapse, smoothed itself with a few deliberate licks. Her face reset to its neutral expression. Her posture adjusted to perfection. The figure who had sung, sprinted, and destroyed was gone. In her place was a calm, composed, graceful being. The first illusion. She walked into the living room. Each paw landed without sound. Her tail curved neatly, balanced like a pendulum. She leapt onto the couch. Without disturbing the pillow she landed near. She curled into a circle so symmetrical it could have been drawn with a compass. Her eyes closed. Her purr activated. The house, for the first time since the night began, appeared peaceful. The visitor. At 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. A visitor entered. They had not been present for the night. They had not heard the dawn chorus. They had not seen the march of the bowl. They had not witnessed the marathon of stairs. They saw only the illusion. The cat lifted her head slowly. She blinked once, slowly. She walked toward the visitor with deliberate calm. She sat politely at their feet. The visitor leaned down. She's so gentle, so quiet, so easy to live with. I said nothing. The selective vision. The visitor did not look at the alarm clock on the floor. They did not notice the missing slipper. They did not ask about the bent shower curtain. They did not question the tilted lamp. Their eyes saw only the cat. The ruins were invisible. The illusion was total. The demonstration. The cat performed her routine flawlessly. She blinked slowly, the well-practiced gesture of feline affection. She leaned her head against the visitor's hand. She purred at a measured volume, not too loud, not too faint. The visitor smiled. She must never give you trouble. I said nothing again. The sequence of naps. The day moved forward. At 11 o'clock, she napped on the couch. At noon, she shifted to the chair. At 1 o'clock, she relocated to the rug. At 2, she stretched under the table. At 3, she returned to the couch. Each nap was arranged like an exhibit in a museum. Each position demonstrated composure, calm, and elegance. Each reinforced the illusion. The afternoon guest. At 4 o'clock, another visitor arrived. They had not been present for the night either. They looked at the cat curled neatly on the rug. "She's like a little angel," they said. "So peaceful." I looked at the rug. It still bore claw marks from the midnight sprint. They did not notice. The illusion remained intact. The invisible evidence. The house contained abundant proof of the night. A spoon beneath the refrigerator, a coaster behind the couch, a sock missing from the dresser, a slipper stranded on the staircase, a curtain tilted in the bathroom. But the visitors did not see. They saw only the sleeping figure curled like an ornament. The illusion was unbreakable. The closing of day. As the sun lowered, the visitors left. The house fell quiet again. The cat stretched once more. She shifted positions, curling into the hallway again. Her breathing slowed, her eyes closed. The daytime illusion drew to its close. But I knew the truth. The silence was temporary. The peace was false. The cycle was waiting. Night would return. The performance would resume. The illusion would vanish. And the story would begin again.